Um, Hello, my friends. This is chapter 5 of my book, El Intimo, a book that I wrote several years ago about evil things. Chapter 5. Arthur's condition worsened. Aghast at Arthur's deteriorating condition and the increasing distress of Padre Miguel, Claire made a desperate decision. She would seek out Jacobita, and somehow she would put a stop to the evil that had invaded them. Padre Miguel, you must stop this exorcism. It is destroying both of you. I will go to Jacobita and appeal to her. Please, Claire begged. No, Claire, you cannot go to her, the priest angrily stated. Don't you know that she is in league with the devil and no human power can defeat her? You cannot go. Kneeling before the priest, she begged for the protection of a blessing, and the priest, seeing her determination, touched her head with his hands and called upon Almighty God to protect her and guide her in her quest, her Calvary. She rose to her feet, a determined woman, a woman set to do battle with that ancient evil, that destroyer of man. She left the house. The priest continued with his incantations and lamentations, pleading for the release of Arthur's soul from the grip of Jacobita, the bruja, the witch. Claire made her way quietly and quickly to the edge of the village, where Jacobita's shack was located. As she approached the weather-beaten shack, she felt a strong, mindless force around her and repel her backwards away from the shack. Fighting against the force, which was like a powerful headwind pushing mightily against her, she forced herself forward until she reached the doorway. "Jacobita!" she screamed as she pounded on the door. Suddenly, as quickly as it had started, the repelling force abated, and she was surrounded by an eerie silence. She pounded again on the door, yelling out Jacobita's name. As if by a force of itself, the door sprang open, so suddenly that Claire almost fell backward into the darkened room and beyond. Claire quickly regained her balance, and in a weak voice called out again, "Jacobita, are you there?" A thin, reedy voice answered, "Yes, come in, Claire, and sit down." Towards the back of the room, a match suddenly flared up, and Claire saw the small flame arch and then brighten up momentarily. The flame arched upwards, and in the faint illumination, Claire saw the dim figure of Jacobita. She blew out the match. "What do you want here?" Jacobita said in her thin, reedy voice. "Why are you here?" "It's about Arthur. I want you to free him." "Free him?" Jacobita spat angrily. "Do you see him here that you asked me to free him?" Jacobita abruptly raised her hand high into the air, and Claire felt a brutal shove from an unseen power push her violently into a chair behind her. She fell clumsily into the chair and tried to right herself against the terrible pressure in the middle of her chest. "Don't you know," Jacobita whispered in a voice, "Arthur's mine now. He called me from the path by the stream. I came to him, and he wants me. He's mine." "Oh, for the love of God, Jacobita, please release him. He's dying," Claire pleaded. For an infinitesimal moment, a glimpse of doubt crossed Jacobita's hardened features. It was quickly replaced by a hideous scowl. Cursing wildly, she was jerked backward as if by an opposing force. "Get away from me, hija de puta, you whore. He is mine now." But it was too late. Claire had seen the moment of indecision, and she grasped at it desperately, clinging to the tiny kernel of humanity that had inadvertently escaped Jacobita. "I beg you, Jacobita, for the love of God and for the mother who bore you, release my Arthur and save yourself," Claire pleaded. A long and deep growl escaped Jacobita's lips, and her mouth contorted into a hideous mask of hatred and loathing. It seemed to come from deep within her and was all around Claire, assaulting her from every direction. A deep voice, solely alien to Jacobita's high and reedy voice, invaded the room. It took on an echoing quality, a sound of many voices all speaking at once, but not exactly in unison, broken up, splintered, and shattered like broken glass. You stupid little shit, you slime, how dare you oppose us? The voice escaped from Jacobita. Again, Claire saw an internal struggle, a violent assault, and a spark of compassion in Jacobita's face and eyes. Deep within Jacobita's features, Claire saw and felt a vain attempt to escape that was quickly quelled by a superior and pervasive force. Instinctively, and without regard for her own safety, Claire closed her eyes and raised her hands heavenward and prayed desperately to God to protect Jacobita, to forgive her, for she now knew that Jacobita was in the grip of something alien and evil and that she could not escape on her own. From deep within her subconsciousness, the words of the priest prayed to the most blessed Mother of God came to her, and she invoked them with all the power of her assaulted heart. O most immaculate heart of Mary, never let it be known that anyone who fled to your protection was left unaided. O most immaculate heart of Mary, Claire petitioned with all her heart. Jovita, Jacobita, sensing that Claire was pleading for her, raised her arms violently again and conjured up a powerful wind, sending debris flying all over the room and crushing all the walls around Claire. Miraculously, nothing struck her. The foul stench of spilt lamp oil invaded the small, dank room. The rippling of a tongue of fire on the floor rushing to Jacobita riveted Claire's attention. Jacobita sprang away from the flames and furiously attempted to put out the fire, but it was too late. The oil had splattered on her, and the flames rippled through the air and set her afire. Within seconds, Jacobita was totally engulfed. Claire felt the pervading force momentarily release her, and she leaped away from the flames and stumbled out the door of the shack. The intense heat crackled around her as she desperately clawed away from the opening. She looked backward at the inferno behind her, and the blast of heat knocked her to the ground. She saw Jacobita crumble to the floor with her arms flailing against the flames consuming her. The burning head of Jacobita turned to her, and Claire heard the screaming wail of Jacobita's last gasp, incredibly within her own head, but seemingly from Jacobita. "He's mine! He's mine!" Jacobita then lay crumbled on the shack of the floor, and the flames died away. In shock, Claire took a small step towards the doorway of the shack, but it was too late. All was consumed. As suddenly as it had started, it was over. An eerie silence lay heavily on the devastated funeral pyre of what was once Jacobita. Claire turned sadly and made her way back to the priest's house, and Arthur, with a heavy heart filled with sadness and failure. Almost unbeknownst to her, she somehow made her own way back and finally reached the house. A peaceful quiet seemed to fill the air. The priest opened the door, and Claire walked in. "Claire, it's over. Look at Arthur. It's over," he said quietly. Claire looked at her husband, and she saw that indeed it was over, but an air of defeat lined his face. Gone was the inner strength that she had always admired in him. His face was now lined with fear and indecision. An aura of loss surrounded him, and he appeared confused and unsure. A deathly pall hung over him. He could see that Arthur would never be the same again. "What happened, Arthur?" she asked. "I don't know, Claire," he whispered in a hoarse voice tinged with weakness. "It was like a very bad nightmare. I found myself trapped in this strange and desolate desert, a place where nothing seemed solid. Away in the darkness I heard Jacobita calling to me. I tried to go to her, but as I got closer, I saw that it wasn't her. I fought against her call, but I couldn't get away. I couldn't wake up. I would look at her and I would see her, but at the same time it didn't seem like her. It was as if she were someone else. I could see that it was her, but her eyes looked at me and with a hatred and cunning, almost as if it were someone else's eyes. Her eyes were inside my head, and I couldn't get away." And there were voices everywhere, Claire. Voices from the past of people I have known, which I am sure are dead now. And they were all calling my name and pleading with me, but I couldn't respond. Jacobita wouldn't let them. She was too strong against it. She kept beating them away before I could reach out to them. Their voices were filled with pain and suffering, and I felt their unseen hands clutching at me as they tried to touch me. I ran, and I ran, but it didn't matter how far or where. I ran I always ended up in the same place with Jovita in the distance calling me, reaching out for me, and I couldn't see anything clearly. It was very dim and misty and nothing seemed solid. Far, far away I could see what seemed to be solid mountains, but everything was gigantic, bigger than anything I've ever known. Despite the hugeness of everything around me, as I approached anything at all, it melted away into nothing. Everything was very smooth and silky, like something that had been worn down with no edges, until no edges were left. Suddenly, I became a sprinkling of water following me, and it quenched me. I desperately reached out for that saving rain, and it soothed me. But each time the sprinkling water came, Jovita screamed in rage. She rushed at me each time and with a wild fury cursed the rain, and when it fell on her, it burned her, and it was too painful for her to continue her attack. It overcame her and forced her away, cringing in fear and desolation. She cowered like a beaten animal in the distance for as long as the rain fell. Suddenly, I felt like I was falling from a great height, but somehow I never landed on anything. Jovita ran towards me to arrest my fall, but the chasm between us grew faster than she could run. Finally, the distance between us was so great she was unable to reach me. Despite that distance that separated us, I saw that she was crying with great gut-wrenching sobs. She fell on her knees and begged forgiveness and pleaded for me to pray for her, to forgive her. Behind her, I saw a great shadow approach her and envelop her. At times she ran from the shadow, but it always overcame her. As the shadow disappeared into air, she started hurling curses at me in a strange voice, guttural and echoing as if there were many voices mixed into one. Then the shadow would reappear as if from within her, and she would fall on her knees and resume her begging for forgiveness. I was fascinated by this struggle, as the forces buffeting me about would recede and reform, as the shadow receded and undulated like waves in the ocean. Then something happened. All of a sudden, there was a strange light and everything was visible except where Jovita had fallen. She reached out for me, and I tried to give her my hand, but she slipped away. She faded away, and the light was everywhere, and I couldn't see her anymore. She was gone. The strain of the telling was far too much for Arthur, and his voice became weaker and weaker, until at last he fell into a deep and fitful sleep. Padre Miguel laid a crucifix on Arthur's chest and covered him gently with a blanket. "Come with me, Claire, into the next room so he can rest. He's safe for now," Padre Miguel said as he motioned Claire to leave the room. "I have done everything that I can do for him. From now on, it is going to be up to you to bring him back. He has fought a valiant battle with the most ancient evil in the world, and no one can come out of that fight intact. In every case where a human is attacked by a demon, a little bit of humanity is lost forever, no matter how valiantly the attack is rebuffed. But don't despair. Arthur is a very fortunate man. Jovita is a very young witch and not very skilled. While her Intimo is extremely formidable, she is still not yet powerful and doesn't know how to use the spirit to the limits of its power. I fear for you both because something happened to interrupt the exorcism. El Intimo was not defeated, he was recalled. He will attack again." "How do you know this, Padre Miguel?" Claire asked. "Because we had only reached the first stage of the exorcism, the stage where only the presence of the Spirit is apparent. As a few minutes ago, Arthur sat up suddenly and expelled a great sigh, as if a huge weight had been removed from him. I was praying for Jovita when it happened. I know the battle was not yet won, and that it was a temporary surcease," Padre Miguel continued soberly. "Oh, Padre Miguel, something terrible happened in Jovita's shack," Claire said. "When I pleaded with Jovita, she loosed a great weight in the shack, and the oil lamp was spilled. A great flame burst in the shack, and before Jovita could stop it, it was out of control. Oh, Padre Miguel, the flames engulfed her and killed her," Claire cried. "Oh, my God!" exclaimed Padre Miguel. "Don't you see what happened, Claire? It was her carelessness that interrupted El Intimo. No, no, it was not that, Padre Miguel. She repented in those last agonizing moments of life that she had left. I know it, Padre Miguel. I saw in her eyes, and I know she released Arthur. Padre Miguel became reflective at Claire's revelation and didn't speak for several minutes. Poor Jacobita. I don't know if what you say is true. We have to pray for her. I don't think she released him. End of chapter 4.